Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are in the world. Thanks again for joining our webinar today on the state of mobile internet connectivity 2020. I'm Anne de Laporte. I am working in the Connected Society program at the GSMA, and I will be joined by my colleague Calvin Baya from GSMA Intelligence, the other lead author on this report. So in this webinar, we're going to present you the key findings from the report that was published in September with support from financial support from FCDO. It will be followed by a short demonstration of the mobile connectivity index. And so the presentation will last about 35-40 minutes, and that will be followed by a 15-20 minutes long question and answer session. And please, during the session, type your question in the Q&A box that you will see appearing in the middle of the right-hand side of the screen, and we will take them at the end. So as you know, connectivity has become more important than ever. And during this time of pandemic, connectivity is what is allowing us to stay connected with our friends and family, allow us to continue to work, to engage in other types of economic activities, allow our children to continue their education. So while mobile has become indispensable in our daily life, especially in low and middle income countries where mobile accounts for 87% of broadband connection, connectivity is not equal, and we'll show you that in more details today. So before we jump into the findings, I am going to give you a bit of context on the Connected Society program. So the Connected Society program provides insight and advisory support on how to address key barriers to mobile internet adoption in low and middle income countries. And there are 5 key barriers that we're focusing on. So what we need to do is to ensure that network and enablers are accessible and that handsets are usable. We need to ensure that handset data and services are affordable. We need to have relevant content, product and services that are available. And we need to address digital skills and literacy. And finally, we need to address the safety, security, and harassment concerns that inhibit citizens from benefiting or even wanting to access and use mobile internet. So we'll go through most of the barriers during the presentation today. And I will start by giving you a bit of background on the report and the methodology we used for this report. We'll then go through the key findings on coverage and usage worldwide and provide some key recommendations to accelerate digital inclusion and connect the unconnected population. And in the end, my colleague Robert, who contributed to the report, will provide a short demonstration on how you can use the GSMA mobile connectivity index tool that allow you to explore country-level data and do country comparison across several years. So as I mentioned, we'll have a 15-20 minutes long Q&A session. So again, I encourage you to ask your question in the Q&A section on your screen. So the state of mobile internet connectivity is an annual report produced by Connected Society and GSMA Intelligence, and it's now in its 3rd edition. In this report, we're looking at the state of mobile internet connectivity worldwide, and we have now about 5 years of data that allow us to make year-on-year comparison on how usage and coverage have been changing. In this report, we're also looking at the barriers and drivers for mobile internet access and use in low and middle income countries. And the reason why we're focusing specifically on low and middle income countries is because this is where 75% of the connected population live, but it's also where 90% of the unconnected population live. And we'll go through that again in more details in a second. The report also covers the achievements and challenges in extending mobile broadband coverage and provides evidence-based suggestions to accelerate mobile internet access. So the findings are based on 2 bespoke analytical tools developed by the GSMA. The first one is the Mobile Connectivity Index. We call it the MCI, and this is a publicly available tool that measures the performance of 170 countries across 4 enablers. And the second data source is the GSMA Intelligence Consumer in Focus survey. And this is a large-scale nationally representative survey that has been running for 3 years now. And it's representing 75% of the low and middle income countries' population across 3 survey years. Last year, we conducted the survey in 15 low and middle income countries, as you can see on the right of your screen, in purple. We had countries across all continents low and middle income countries. So let's now move on to the research findings. So in this chart, you can see the global evolution of the mobile internet connectivity between 2014 and 2019. And the blue part shows the percentage of the population that is connected. So when we mean connected, it means using mobile internet across the years. So you can see that the number has steadily increased over the years. And while back in 2014, you had only 1 in 3 people worldwide was using mobile internet, now nearly half of the population is using mobile internet. So that means 1.5 billion new users within 5 years. This is really great progress that has been made, and we have now 3.8 billion mobile internet users that across the world, with many of them living in low and middle income countries. And for those people in low and middle income countries, mobile is as a primary and often the only way to access the internet. So in terms of connections, so when these people are connected, it's worth mentioning that nowadays, at its point in time, like 4G connection account for more than 50% of mobile connection globally. Which is also like lots of progress has been made. And while we'll not go into the details of the change in technology, there is a section of the report that provides more detail on that. So, however, what you can see as well is that more than half of the global population still remains connected. So what we do is that we have used 2 key metrics to determine the state of mobile internet connectivity, the usage gap and the coverage gap. So the coverage gap, that's represents the population that is not covered by any mobile broadband signal. So what we mean here is like 3G and above. And this gap is represented on this chart in gray. And in 2019, the coverage gap was standing at 7%, down from 24% in 2014, so just below 600 million people. There's been a lot of progress made in terms of reducing the coverage gap. But when we talk about connectivity, we're not obviously talking only about coverage, we're also talking about usage. And it means we need to look at the percentage of population that is using, or actually that is not using mobile internet despite being covered. So in yellow, you can see the percentage of the population that lives within the footprint of a mobile broadband network, but does not use mobile internet. That's what we call the usage gap. And it stands at 44% of the global population. It's like meaning 3.4 billion people are currently not using mobile internet. And this gap is now 6 times larger than the coverage gap. And again, it hasn't changed much over the past few years. So I've just given you a global overview of the state of connectivity. Let's now look at regional breakdowns. And you will note some major disparities between and within regions when it comes to connectivity. So when you look at North America and Europe and Central Asia, these are the 2 regions that have the highest percentage of mobile internet users. And in these 2 regions, more than 70% of the population is using mobile internet. However, when you look at low and middle income countries, and specifically South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, you see that the gaps in terms of usage, in terms of coverage, in terms of people connected is it's quite big. So in Sub-Saharan Africa, 25% of the population is not connected. However, there's been a big improvement there in terms of decreasing the coverage gap from half of the population in 2014 to 1 in 4 people, 25% in 2019. And nearly half of the population covered is not using mobile internet, as you can see in the bubble in yellow. So what is not represented on the map is what is also interesting is what happens within the region. So if we take sub-Saharan Africa and if we look at the percentage of the population connected, you have on average 26% of the population is using mobile internet across the region. However, 50% of the population in South Africa is using mobile internet, which is the highest in terms of usage, and only 6% in Equatorial Guinea. So really big disparities within a region. When we look at South Asia, there's been clearly big progress made to narrow the coverage gap in between 2018 and 2019. And this is thanks to accelerated 3G and 4G deployments, particularly in India and in Pakistan. And the gap decreased actually from 13% in 2018 to 6% in 2019. So while there is a very small coverage gap, 61% of the population who lives within the footprint of a broadband network doesn't use it. And this gap has actually substantially increased since 2014. So what it means here is that while speedy network rollouts are continuing, this is not followed straight away by an increase in the proportion of mobile internet users. So there is a lag between the coverage rollout and usage. So again, like overall, what we said is that 50%, nearly half of the population is not able to realize the social and economic benefits that mobile internet can enable. And if the trend continues, we estimate that more than 40% of the population in low and middle income countries will still be offline by 2025. And the connectivity gaps disproportionately affect women and rural population, exacerbating existing inequalities. So let's look at the change in connectivity across these two segments, women and rural. As you can see in the chart, on the left-hand side in yellow, those living in rural areas are 37% less likely to access mobile internet than those living in urban areas in low and middle income countries in 2019. And while the gap has been gradually closing over the years, it has remained substantial. On the right-hand side, you can see the rural gap in sub-Saharan Africa is remaining high at 60%, and it's actually the highest gap across all low and middle income region, and doesn't show much sign of narrowing. And we did observe, though, a notable decrease in the rural-urban usage gap in South Asia, and this is down now from 47% in 2017 to 30% in 2019. And this is this improvement in reduction of the rural-urban usage gap is likely to be due to a combination of coverage expansions in rural areas, an increased awareness of mobile internet, and also more affordable devices for rural population. And similarly to the rural-urban gap, the gender gap in mobile internet use has narrowed, but is still significant. In 2019, women were 20% less likely than men to use mobile internet in low and middle income countries, which is still an improvement compared to 27, where 27% of the population was not, women were 27% less likely than men to use mobile internet. So there's been improvement, but still a considerable gender gap in mobile internet use. And again, when we look at regions, we can see that there has been a gradual narrowing of the gender gap in South Asia. However, it's still the highest in the world, with women that are 51% less likely to use mobile internet than men. And in sub-Saharan Africa, there has been no change of in terms of usage, in terms of gender gap, and we know that about a third of women were using mobile internet in sub-Saharan Africa in 2019, while men, half of the male population was using mobile internet during that year. So a big difference between men and women. So now that we looked at the trends in coverage and usage, I will hand over to Calvin, who will talk about how the barriers to mobile internet usage have been changing over the years. Over to you, Calvin.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you again for all of you who have taken the time to come to this webinar today. So I'm now going to discuss some of the report's findings on the key barriers to mobile internet use. I've already seen some questions in the Q&A around what explains some of these connectivity gaps we're seeing, so hopefully we'll touch on this now. In the report, we identified 4 key stages that individuals go through on their journey to becoming regular use of mobile internet. And the barriers to adoption, as we will see, aren't always the same across these different steps of the journey. So the first step is actual ownership in getting a mobile device. And here we find that the primary barrier remains around affordability. The next step is actually being aware that mobile internet exists and that you can access internet on a mobile device. The third step is then around becoming connected. Here we'll see that from a consumer's perspective, the main barriers are still around digital literacy and skills, followed by affordability. We won't have time to touch on this, but we find that safety and security are also becoming more prevalent as concerns in recent years, especially in Latin America and also increasingly in sub-Saharan Africa as well. And lastly, once an individual is then connected, we can still see very significant differences in terms of their levels and intensity of usage, which is something we will also touch on. So going to the next slide, if we look at this first stage around affordability, so consumers still report this as the main barrier to mobile internet, or they're more likely to report this as a barrier than other things. But we are seeing an improved trend with regard to affordability. What you can see in this chart is across the different regions, what's the average cost of an internet-enabled device, an entry-level one, as a proportion of monthly GDP per capita. And you can see that across sort of globally, this has been falling over the last 4 years. And if we look at it by region, 2 of the ones I particularly wanted to call out were South Asia, where we've seen a reduction in since 2016 from 35% to 21%. And in sub-Saharan Africa, a reduction from 44% to 30%. And we also see a notable decline in the Middle East and North Africa region as well. This has been primarily driven by the increased availability of lower cost devices. In particular, the use of new smart feature phones has been very important. A very well-known example is the Jio phone in India, which is now available for less than $10. But also in 2019, we saw a number of new smart feature phones launched in several sub-Saharan African countries that were priced at around $20. That being said, despite these trends, the cost of the device is still going to remain a barrier, especially those on the lowest incomes. If we look at the poorest 20% of population in sub-Saharan Africa, the cost of a device can still be well above 100% of their monthly income. So this will remain this is still likely to remain an issue. Then moving to the next slide, the other component of affordability is not around the device, but it's related to data bundles. And so what we're measuring on this chart is the cost of accessing a data plan that gives you 1 gigabyte of data per month, again, expressed as a proportion of monthly GDP per capita. Here again, we're seeing a positive trend. So the cost of data as a share of monthly income has decreased by more than 40% over the last 4 years. You can see there's some notable declines in sub-Saharan Africa. Nevertheless, despite that, the average or the median cost of 1 gigabyte still exceeds the international affordability threshold of mobile internet. So that threshold is that 1 gigabyte should ideally be less than 2% of monthly income, and we find that over half of low and middle income countries are exceeding that. And in fact, across these regions, only in South Asia, Europe and Central Asia do the majority of countries meet that threshold. And then, of course, in some countries, affordability is even more of a barrier for the poorest groups in the country. Countries that have very high levels of extreme poverty, such as Zimbabwe, Yemen, Democratic Republic of Congo, will be examples of that. So that highlights some affordability analysis. Moving on to the second step of the customer journey, which is the awareness of mobile internet. This chart shows in some of the countries that we've been carrying out consumer surveys, it shows awareness of mobile internet. And overall, across the countries we surveyed, around 1/4 of adults aren't actually aware that you can access the internet on a mobile device. That's quite a lot and is a barrier that needs to be addressed, but we have seen, as you can see in this chart, some significant progress and increases in awareness over time. What's also encouraging is that this awareness has been growing disproportionately for women in rural populations. So, for example, in Bangladesh, awareness amongst women increased from 34% in 2017 to 71% in 2019, and there's now almost no disparity by gender. So again, there's a barrier, but the trend is improving. In terms of coming on to the next slide, if we look at other barriers to adoption, so as part of our consumer survey, for the individuals who are, or the respondents who are aware of mobile internet but who don't use it, we ask them why they don't use that. They can provide a number of responses. So they can provide, they can say, I don't use mobile internet for affordability reasons or skills or content. So they can have multiple barriers. And we identify these as general barriers. We then ask a follow-up question to say, out of all of these barriers, which for you is the top or most important barrier? So on this slide on the left-hand chart, you can see the proportion of respondents that identify digital literacy and skills as a general barrier. So to provide an example, in Algeria in 2019, for those who are aware of mobile internet but weren't using it, 64% said skills is a barrier for me. But then if you then look at the chart on the right, you'll find that of the whole group, 38% said actually skills is the most important barrier for me. So the key takeaway from this is that, particularly looking at the chart on the right, lack of literacy and skills was reported on average as the top barrier by around a third of respondents in our surveyed countries, making it the biggest perceived barrier to mobile internet adoption amongst mobile users who are aware of mobile internet. Women in rural populations are especially more likely to cite literacy and skills as barriers. We are seeing, as you can see on the chart on the left, that they are becoming less of a general barrier in some countries, such as Bangladesh, Mexico, and Mozambique. But still, it remains significant, and fostering literacy and digital skills is going to be essential to build on the foundations of digital societies and drive mobile internet adoption. On the next slide, we present very similar analysis, but instead of looking at digital skills, looking at relevance. So I won't spend as much time on this, but the main takeaway here is that across the countries that we survey, relevance is declining as a barrier. So fewer people are saying that the internet isn't relevant to them and that there's not enough content. So this suggests that people are increasingly seeing mobile internet as relevant to their lives, which is also consistent with what we're seeing on the mobile connectivity index that we'll discuss later. Coming to the next slide. So in terms of the fourth part of the step in the consumer journey. So in our consumer survey, we've asked mobile internet users how frequently they engage in certain use cases and activities. We can see in this chart that, perhaps unsurprisingly, instant messaging and social networks remain the most popular online activities in low and middle income countries. But in recent years, we're seeing a notable increase in other services. You can see there, for example, accessing educational and health information. And this suggests that usage is becoming more diverse and beneficial as consumers engage in a wider array of activities. We expect that this intensity of mobile internet activities, the increase in intensity, has probably become more apparent in a post-COVID-19 world when individuals have become more reliant on digital services. But that will be something that will be quite interesting to see next for the report and connectivity index next year. So I'll hand back to you, Anne, to sort of wrap up some of the report's key findings.
Sorry, I was on mute. So thanks, Calvin. Let's do a quick recap on the learnings so far. So first, what we've seen here is that almost half of the world population now uses mobile internet, and 4G connections account now for more than 50% of mobile connection worldwide. And the coverage gap is narrowing. It stands now at 7%. But the usage gap is still significant, with 44% of the population that is covered, but not using mobile internet services. And it's even higher for marginalized groups such as rural population and women. Although we can see improvements in regions such as South Asia. When we look at the barriers to mobile internet adoption, we've seen that handsets and data have become more affordable. That is driven, one of the reasons is the emergence of affordable smart feature phone, but affordability still remains the main barrier to mobile ownership. And awareness and perceived relevance of mobile internet have also increased, but still 25% of adults are not aware of it. We also found from our consumer in focus surveys that a lack of literacy and digital skills remains the main barrier to mobile internet use for those who are aware of mobile internet. And finally, as Calvin just said, we found that people are increasingly using a diverse range of services, so moving still using instant messaging and social media, but increasingly so using services for health, education, paying utilities. That might get more traction now in the current context. So, as you see, the industry has made a lot of progress in making the world more connected over the past 5 years. And it has, and it still will require a strong collective effort from the ecosystem to address the barriers. So the mobile industry, the broader development community, and policymakers and regulators all have a role to play in order to promote and enabling environments that leverage the full power of mobile internet to connect more citizens and further drive digital inclusion. And we've seen over the years a very good example of how this has been done. So, for example, if we look at operators, they are leveraging innovation funds to expand internet access and use, as well as developing digital skills training initiatives, where the GSMA is supporting as well. Policymakers in many countries are developing more enabling regulatory frameworks, for example, by assigning or refarming additional spectrum. And the development community continues to partner with both the public and the private sector to develop sustainable connectivity solutions. One of these examples are the World Bank Moonshot for Africa initiative. So there's still more work to be done, and it might become more challenging as it involves providing connectivity to people that are in more rural, more remote areas. And it's really, it's again what I was saying at the beginning, it's not only about closing the coverage gap, but also like critically continuing increasing the affordability of handsets and data, improving level of literacy and digital skills, and creating a local digital ecosystem. So we've made recommendations for different types of stakeholders. So from the example I just gave of what has been done, it's actually continuing continuing that path. For example, operators in partnership with development community should focus on developing new commercially sustainable and scalable business model, but also innovation and services that drive coverage, adoption, and usage. And for policymakers, for example, and regulators, it's really continuing facilitating this effort and developing policy and regulatory frameworks that stimulate innovation and investment and build trust. It's also recommend that they support extending coverage through access to affordable spectrum, best practice taxation policies, and removing obstacles to the deployment. So you can find more information in the full report. So this is now the end of the presentation of the mobile connectivity, the state of mobile internet connectivity. And I will now hand over to my colleague Robert to take a look at mobile internet mobile connectivity index tool. And before that, I will hand over to Calvin, actually, to develop the methodology for this tool and has worked on the metrics for it. So over you to Calvin.
Thank you very much, Anne. Yeah, I suspect a lot of you are probably quite interested in the index demonstration, so I'll try and cover this background quickly. All of this information is provided in the report and on the Connectivity Index website too. So the Mobile Connectivity Index is a tool that supports the mobile industry's efforts to drive mobile internet connectivity and accelerate digital inclusion. It's now in its 5th year. The index covers 170 countries against 41 individual indicators over a 2014 to 2019 period. And the indicators are grouped into 4 overarching enablers: infrastructure, affordability, consumer readiness, and content and services. When looking at the tool, you'll see that all of the indicators and scores have consistent units of measurement. Everything has a score between 0 to 100, and a high score represents a stronger performance. Coming to the next slide, just wanted to highlight that the index, there are a number of other ICT indices in public. This Mobile Connectivity Index has a few characteristics that distinguish it from these. Specifically, it focuses just on mobile internet connectivity, so the majority of indicators in this index aren't available or used in other indices. It also correlates very highly with mobile internet adoption, and we've also seen that the countries that are most improved on the index have also seen some of the biggest increases in mobile internet adoption. So we've constructed the index so that it's an effective tool to identify country priorities to drive mobile internet adoption. As a result, since its launch 5 years ago, policymakers, operators, NGOs, and international organizations have all used the index to better understand which elements need to be put in place and which need to be improved to drive mobile internet adoption in each country. And it's one of the main ICT development indicators in UNESCO's Internet Development Framework, and it's also been cited by a number of other organizations like the World Bank and ITU, as you can see there. And then on the next slide, just before going through the tool, I just wanted to highlight that it's on indices, it's very often tempting to look at the ranking of countries and compare them to perhaps their regional peers. We recommend that you don't place too much emphasis when looking on individual scores or rankings. What we think this index is very useful for, particularly as we have 6 years of data, is to look at changes over time. This allows you to identify which countries have made strong progress on certain enablers or dimensions or indicators, and it can allow you to compare countries that perhaps haven't improved so much against those that have. So, for example, on this slide, we can see the most improved countries in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. For most of these countries, the improvements have been driven by increases in infrastructure and affordability. Some of the indicators for content and services have also seen improvement, for example, on social media penetration and cybersecurity, though the indicators measuring consumer readiness and digital skills tend to change more slowly over time. So I think it's useful to have some of these things in mind before you start to use the tool yourself. But with all that said, I'll now hand over to you, Robert, to go through a demo of the tool.
Great. You should now be able to see the screen. So, hello everyone, my name is Robert Brzykowski and I'm an insights analyst with Connectivity Program. And I'd like to give you a quick demo of our Mobile Connectivity Index tool that you can find at mobileconnectivity.com, mobileconnectivityindex.com. that Calvin has just introduced to you. This is the front page of the tool, which depicts a full world map. You can see that the color tone corresponds with the country score, so the deeper and darker the tone, the higher the score. As you can see on the very bottom, you can switch the scores for all the years between 2014 and 2019 to track the country progress. You can select a country straight from the map, which we will do in a moment, or you can select them from the menu on the right-hand side right here in country specific. That's the list of the countries. You can click on View Global Scores to see the country rank and either by the total index for different years. That's the most recent one with Australia on top, followed by Singapore and New Zealand. Or you can rank countries by the four main enablers: infrastructure, affordability, consumer score, and content and services. The map in data maps, the map allows viewing country scores both at the main score, which is the default, or at the enabler, dimension, and indicator level. So, for example, we can see which countries score the best in terms of general affordability. That would be, for example, UK, Australia, or Scandinavia. Or you can go even lower down to dimensions to see which countries score better with mobile tariffs or handset price. So, for example, with mobile tariffs, it seems that Poland, Kazakhstan are scoring quite highly, or Scandinavia. And then we can go even lower, more granular to indicators to check the more specific data packages. You can check all the scores on the view data, all 4 tiers again, enablers, dimensions, indicators, and main score for all the years from 2014 to 2019. And you can download the whole data set in Excel for your more in-depth analysis right here, download index data. Now, let me show you a country example. Let's select and click Nigeria, one of the most improved countries in Sub-Saharan Africa in MCI, and one of the most improved globally. Nigeria increased, let's look for 2019. Nigeria increased its score from 45 to 49 within 1 year. When you click on a country, you can see on the left-hand side key metrics for mobile internet connectivity, so 3G coverage, mobile connections, rural populations, mobile broadband connections. You can take a much in-depth view when you click on View Country Analysis. This is the breakdown of the score, again, by enablers, by dimensions, and by indicators that you can see here. They are all up in one score. And this is what Calvin introduced us earlier, the indicator breakdown. You may also perform the country analysis and compare the country against others. So first you see this is for Nigeria index score in the form of a graph, and you can select all the neighbors, dimensions, and indicators to look at it in more detail. So, for example, in case of Nigeria, you can see that since 2014, there's been a big increase in infrastructure score, which is driven mostly by the accelerated 3G and 4G coverage and 3G, 4G network rollouts, particularly by deployment of EMT ES900, which allowed operators to route 3G in a more cost-effective manner. In orange, you can see increase in content and services, which is driven by the increase of e-government score for Nigeria, but also the increase of number of active mobile apps developed per person in the country. And Nigeria is now home to almost 2,000 mobile apps developers. Affordability is another big increase from 45 in 2014 up to 55 in 2019. That's thanks to the emergence of smart feature phones, with a notable example of MTN 3G smart feature phone, which costs only $20. As I said, you can compare the countries, the country with other countries. So we can take a look at, for example, Cameroon and Ghana, to see how they can be compared against Nigeria. Although, bear in mind what Calvin said, that we shouldn't really pay that much importance to this, especially how countries rank against one against another. It's more about how country develops over the years. And also we can look at the regional average, so how Nigeria scores against sub-Saharan Africa in total, and we can see that the average score of Nigeria is much higher than the sub-Saharan Africa average score for affordability enabler, meaning that the devices and data is much more affordable in Nigeria than in other sub-Saharan African countries. In the end, I'd like to bring your attention to the top left corner of the tool. First, you can easily access the State of Mobile Internet Connectivity report here by clicking on this button. And also in the index, about the index, you can access the MCA methodology document that will provide you with a lot more details on methodology that we used. It's right here. This is the end of the demo. I encourage you to try the tool on your own and just click around. Now over to you, Anne, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Robert. So this brings us to the end of this presentation and demonstration. So as you can see on the screen, if you have any question, you can email us. You can find us on the website as well. You see the link for the State of Mobile Internet Connectivity report, as well as the link for the Mobile Connectivity Index. And if you're interested in learning more about what we're doing, you can also subscribe to our newsletter. My colleague is going to put that in the chat, the link to in the chat in a second. So we are now taking in the next 15 minutes any questions that you have. So we've seen there's quite a few questions already in the chat and in the Q&A. So please continue putting your questions. Some have been answered already. Some other will take now. So I will stop sharing my screen, and I have Calvin on the screen as well, which is great. Shall we take it from top to bottom? Yeah. So let's start with the first question on the Mobile Connectivity Index. Can it be used as a factor to correct for weighting and extrapolating survey respondents to the online population within emerging markets? I'll probably leave that to Calvin, who's more familiar with that.
I can probably cover that one quickly. Yeah, very interesting question. Yeah, if I understand you right, what you're I guess addressing here is in terms of understanding if you're carrying out a survey in a country, trying to correct any sort of sampling bias around sampling people online versus not online is obviously a relevant factor. I think the short answer is no. I don't think the connectivity index number can be used for that. It wasn't really designed with that purpose in mind. I think for that you'd probably have to go back to whichever survey you're using, the sample design, and see what corrections need to be made. So no, unfortunately, I don't think you could use the index for that.
We have a comment from someone, obviously one recommendation asking international organization, technical and financial, to join forces and help in country members to reduce gender and urban rural gaps. Yes, indeed. That's correct. I just gave a few recommendations here, but there is a way more recommendation. And actually, I will also encourage you to look at the gender gap report that the Connected Women program has produced a few months ago. My colleague Rosie will put a link to that report in the chat, where you can find actually all the recommendation and actionable recommendation for different stakeholders to reduce the gender gap and rural gap. Next question, maybe Calvin. Is that something for you?
I can see some questions there around some recent analysis looking at the gender gap in mobile phone ownership by women, and also mobile internet connectivity in Latin America. So no, very good question. So in Latin America, you may recall, I think on the slides that Anne presented, we found that for mobile internet, and I think for mobile ownership, that the gender gap in Latin America isn't significant. It is there, but it's not nearly as large as it is in other regions. I haven't read the report that you referred to, though I know of it. We're also aware of some of the other gender gap tracking that takes place. So I know Oxford University, for example, partners with Qatari Computing Institute and other organisations, and they do something similar to us. In addition to using sort of official survey data, they track gender gaps using online tools, for example, using Facebook audience profiles and other online tools as well. And in a minute, I'll post a link to their website, but they generally find something very similar to us, which is that the gender gap in most Latin American countries are pretty aren't really as high as they are in others. But I think your second question around a rural gap, that is quite prevalent in Latin America, as Anne's slide showed. Again, not quite as large as, say, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, but significant. And I think both what the index and the survey analysis that we present in the report, a lot of the barriers that we highlight around digital skills and affordability, they're often quite similar, but they're felt more, they're enhanced for rural populations, especially because incomes might be lower or skills might be at a lower level. The other thing I would say is that in Latin America, what we find from our survey is that safety and security concerns generally tend to be reported much more in Latin America than others. So these can include fears of online fraud or ID theft or online harassment. As I say, these are increasing in a lot of countries, but in Latin America, we really find them to be more prevalent than others. So I think in rural areas, that's likely to be a barrier too. So it's a lot of these things all at once. But some of that is highlighted further in the report as well.
And and I just to add again, like you can find more detail on that in the gender gap report that's the link in the chat. And we know that affordability is also for women in Latin America as a main barrier to owning a mobile. So as Karen said, safety and security concerns is a big thing. For like safety and security and affordability are the two main barriers for ownership of a mobile in Latin America. We saw in the presentation that 39% of the population is not using mobile internet, and by the fact that most of the population is covered, which is quite big. What we've shown in the presentation is the affordability of a entry-level internet-enabled device, and the fact that yes, affordability is quite. It's more affordable in Latin America than in other regions. However, one thing we're not looking at is the affordability, like the perception, and for some people we found also, like from primary research, that people would like to get a better device and see it as expenses and will not want to buy a lower cost device. So that's also like one of the maybe explaining factors that explain why internet connectivity remains low. In terms of like what sort of device you want to buy, which comes out a lot in primary research. I think someone asked if there were we could have country level data and country specific findings. So we so from the consumer survey, we have country data for 15 middle income countries in 2019. And so you have some of this more country level data in the appendix of our report, but again, also like in the gender gap report. And I think then from the mobile internet connectivity index, you can see the scores and understand better what are the key indicators that drive the improvement in scores for different countries.
I'm just going to, and there was another question. I did respond to it, but a very good question from Ashish there on the correlation between mobile penetration and GDP growth, and whether there's a similar link with internet data connectivity. So yes, actually, in previous reports of this, we have looked at the correlation between these two, both mobile internet, not just GDP growth, but also wider measures of social progress, for example, on health and education outcomes. And we do find a positive correlation. What I've just linked to in the report there is a report that we actually just published last week, where we go a little bit further and we try to establish a causal link using a number of statistical techniques. And there we find that actually both mobile ownership not only drives GDP growth, but upgrading to mobile data, for example, 3G and 4G, also drives higher impacts as well. And this is consistent with other literature as well. So I think the evidence on that is quite clear. We haven't done any specific analysis on India, which was another question asked, but I've just linked there to some other reports that I am familiar that have looked at economic impact assessments in India.
We still have 5 minutes. If you have any other question you'd like to ask us. Okay, so we don't have any further questions. So that will be the end of our session. I want to thank you again, everybody, for joining us today. Please feel free to, if anyone else is interested, we're running another session tomorrow afternoon, and we do one in French as well on Thursday, so you can find all the details of that on our website page. So I wish you all a good day or a good afternoon or end of the day, and please feel free to reach out to us if you have any further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.